The 3-year-old handed me a crayon drawing of our house and whispered, "If this picture falls down, you have to hide us." I'd been working for the Reyes family for exactly 11 days when Adriana said that to me. She was sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor with a box of crayons worn down to nubs, drawing the same picture she drew every single afternoon. A blue house with a triangle roof, a yellow sun, 3 stick figures holding hands, and a red door. Always a red door. She'd finish the drawing, study it for a moment, then walk to the refrigerator and tape it at her eye level, right next to an identical drawing she'd done the day before. The fridge was practically wallpapered with these drawings. All the same house, all the same 3 people, all the same red door. I figured it was just a kid thing. 3-year-olds get fixated. My niece went through a phase where she'd only eat foods that were orange. Kids are weird, and that's part of what makes them lovable. But when Adriana said that thing about the picture falling down, something about her voice made me set down the sandwich I was making and actually look at her. She wasn't playing. Her brown eyes were dead serious in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up, because 3-year-olds aren't supposed to look like that. That was the look of a kid who'd rehearsed a line somebody had drilled into her. She'd said it the way you'd recite a fire drill procedure, automatic and grave. I knelt down to her level and asked what she meant. She pointed at the drawing on the fridge and said if the picture was up, everything was okay. If the picture was turned upside down, or if it fell on the floor, I needed to take her and her brother to the bathroom upstairs, lock the door, and call her daddy. Then she added the part that made my skin crawl. She said I shouldn't open the door for anyone who sounded like her mommy. Anyone who sounded like her mommy, not her mommy. Anyone who sounded like her. Before I could ask a follow-up question, her older brother walked in from the living room. Tomas was 7, wiry and serious, with his dad's dark eyes and a habit of standing in doorways and listening before entering a room. He looked at his sister and then at me and said, "Adriana wasn't supposed to tell me about the picture yet because Daddy was going to explain it this weekend." Adriana's face crumpled, and she said she forgot. She just wanted me to know so I could keep them safe. Tomas put his hand on her head, this gentle automatic gesture that looked like he'd done it 1,000 times, and told her it was fine. He looked at me and said their dad would tell me everything, but for now I just needed to remember the rule. Picture up means safe, picture down means hide. I said okay, because what else are you supposed to say to a 7-year-old who's staring at you like a 40-year-old? I finished making their sandwiches and we ate lunch and watched cartoons, and I helped Thomas with his reading homework and gave Adriana a bath, and everything felt completely normal except I couldn't stop glancing at that drawing on the fridge. That night, after their dad came home, I waited until the kids were in bed before I brought it up. Carlos Reyes was 34, a diesel mechanic who worked 6 days a week at a trucking depot. He was quiet, built like someone who carried heavy things for a living, and had this way of measuring his words before he said them like each one cost him money. He'd hired me through a posting at the community college where I was finishing my teaching degree. Needed someone Monday through Saturday, 7 in the morning to 6 at night. The pay was more than I expected, and when I asked why he was offering so much, he just said reliability mattered more to him than saving a few bucks. When I told him what Adriana had said about the drawing, Carlos set down his beer and rubbed his face with both hands. He sat like that for a long time. Then he told me about his ex-wife, Miranda. They'd been together since high school, got married at 21, had Tomas at 27, Adriana at 30. Good years, mostly. Miranda worked as a dental hygienist and coached Tomas's Pee-wee soccer team and threw birthday parties that the whole block came to. Carlos said she was the kind of person who remembered everyone's name at the grocery store. Warm, present, the center of everything. Then about 18 months ago, something changed. It started small enough that Carlos thought he was imagining it. Miranda stopped sleeping. Not just insomnia, but full nights where she'd sit in the dark living room with every light off and all the blinds open, staring out the window. Carlos would come downstairs at 3 in the morning and find her like that, and she'd say she was watching. He asked watching what? She said watching for the people who were following her. There were no people following her. Carlos checked. He drove her usual routes, asked the neighbors, even pulled security camera footage from the dental office where she worked. Nothing. Nobody was following Miranda, but she was certain, and she got angrier every time he suggested it wasn't real. She started accusing him of being part of it, of helping the people who were watching her, of bugging the house with listening devices. She pulled apart the smoke detectors with a screwdriver at 2 in the morning looking for hidden cameras. She stopped letting the kids play in the front yard because she said someone was photographing them. Carlos got her to a doctor, then a psychiatrist. Schizoaffective disorder. The psychiatrist said it sometimes surfaced in the late 20s or early 30s, especially after major life stressors, and Adriana's birth had been traumatic. An emergency C-section with complications that left Miranda in the hospital for 2 weeks. The psychiatrist prescribed medication, and Miranda took it for about 6 weeks, long enough to start seeming like herself again, long enough for Carlos to think the worst was over. Then she stopped taking it. She told Carlos the medication was part of the conspiracy, that the psychiatrist was working with the people watching her, that the pills were designed to make her compliant so they could take her children. The night everything fell apart, Carlos had been working a double shift. Tomas called him at 11 at night, his voice so calm it was terrifying, and said Mommy had put all the furniture in front of the front door and was sitting on the kitchen floor holding a knife and telling Adriana that the bad people couldn't get in anymore. Tomas had taken his sister to the upstairs bathroom and locked the door. He said Mommy kept coming up and knocking and telling them to come out, that she needed to protect them, that she would keep them safe from the bad people. But her voice didn't sound like Mommy's voice. It sounded like someone pretending to be Mommy. Police came. Miranda was hospitalized involuntarily for 72 hours, then voluntarily committed herself for another 3 weeks. Carlos filed for emergency custody and got it. Full custody came later, after Miranda's second episode. That one happened in a Target where she'd started screaming at a cashier she was convinced was following her. She'd had Adriana with her. A stranger had to pull Adriana away from Miranda, while security held Miranda down. The stranger filed a witness statement. The judge read it during the custody hearing and gave Carlos sole legal and physical custody, with Miranda getting supervised visitation once a month at a family services center. Miranda had supervised visits for about 4 months. Then she stopped showing up, stopped returning calls from her caseworker, dropped off the map entirely. Her phone was disconnected. Her apartment was empty when Carlos drove by. Her mother, who lived in another state, said she hadn't heard from her either. That had been 5 months ago, 5 months of silence. Carlos said the silence was worse than the episodes because at least during the episodes, he knew where she was. The drawing on the fridge was Tomas's idea, Carlos told me. After the knife night, Tomas became obsessed with making sure his sister felt safe. He came up with the picture system himself. If the picture was right side up, everything was normal. If he turned it upside down, it meant they needed to hide. He taught Adriana the system like a game so she wouldn't be scared of it. Carlos kept the system because the therapist said it gave Tomas a sense of control, which he desperately needed after spending months as a 6-year-old trying to protect his baby sister from their own mother. Carlos told me he'd hesitated to explain all of this during the interview because the last 2 babysitters had quit after hearing about Miranda. One of them quit on the spot, grabbed her purse and walked out the door before Carlos even finished talking. The other lasted 3 weeks before calling and saying she was sorry, but she couldn't handle the anxiety of wondering if today was the day the kid's mom showed up. He asked if I was going to quit too, and his voice was so flat when he said it, like he'd already prepared for the answer. I told him no. I told him this because I meant it, and because of the way Adriana had looked at me when she explained the drawing. She hadn't looked scared. She'd looked relieved, like she'd been carrying this enormous secret, and now somebody else knew. I also told him because of something I hadn't mentioned to anyone yet. My older sister had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 14. I'd spent 3 years of my adolescence watching someone I loved become someone I didn't recognize. I understood what it was like to be afraid of a person you also missed. I understood that love and danger could wear the same face. Carlos stared at me for a long time after I said that. Then he nodded once, got up, and came back with a folder. Inside was a printed photo of Miranda, recent enough that it matched what she probably looked like now. Medium height, thin, dark hair cut short, a small tattoo of a sparrow on her left wrist. He also gave me a printed copy of the custody order and the number for Detective Rosa Contreras, who'd been assigned to Miranda's case. He said if Miranda showed up, I should get the kids upstairs, lock the bathroom door, and call 911 first, then the detective, then him, in that order. I put the photo and the paperwork in my bag and drove home thinking about Tomas designing a safety system out of crayon drawings because nobody else had given him a better option. Over the next 3 weeks, things were normal enough that I almost forgot about the folder in my bag. Almost. The thing about living with low-level dread is that it becomes background noise. You stop consciously thinking about it, but your body never fully relaxes. I noticed it in the way I'd tense up when someone walked past the house, the way I started checking the locks twice instead of once, the way I'd look at Adriana's drawing on the fridge every morning like checking a barometer. The kids were wonderful in the way that only kids who've been through something terrible can be wonderful. Tomas was fiercely responsible and startlingly perceptive. He noticed when Adriana's mood shifted before she did. He'd steer her away from topics that upset her with this casual precision that broke my heart because no 7-year-old should be that skilled at emotional management. He also had a wicked sense of humor and could do a perfect impression of his dad's "I'm not mad, I'm disappointed" face that made me laugh until my sides hurt. Adriana was pure sweetness wrapped in stubbornness. She had opinions about everything. Socks had to match her shirt. Sandwiches had to be cut diagonal, never horizontal. Bedtime stories had to be read twice. once for listening and once for looking at the pictures. She called me Jessie instead of Jessica because she said my full name had too many parts. She'd climb into my lap without warning and just sit there breathing, like she needed to be held but didn't have the words for it yet. I fell in love with both of them faster than I expected. Not the romantic kind of love, the fierce, protective kind that catches you off guard when someone else's child falls asleep on your shoulder and you realize you would physically fight anyone who tried to hurt them. I understood now why Carlos paid so well. He wasn't paying for childcare. He was paying for loyalty. It was a Tuesday when things shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way that weather changes in the mountains. One minute the sky is blue and the next you can smell the storm coming, even though you can't see it yet. I'd taken the kids to the park 2 blocks from the house, the one with the wooden climbing structure and the tire swing. Tomas was hanging upside down from the monkey bars, and Adriana was filling a bucket with wood chips for reasons known only to her. Normal afternoon. Then Tomas dropped from the bars and landed in front of me and said, very quietly, that the lady on the bench had been watching them for a while. I'd noticed the woman when we arrived. She was sitting on the far bench near the parking lot, wearing a gray hoodie and sunglasses despite the overcast sky. I'd clocked her the way you clock any adult alone at a playground. Brief assessment, probably fine, move on. But now that Tomas mentioned it, I realized she'd been there the entire 40 minutes we'd been at the park, and she hadn't moved, hadn't looked at her phone, hadn't shifted positions, just sat there facing the playground. I couldn't see her face clearly enough to compare to the photo Carlos had given me. The hoodie and sunglasses obscured everything. She was the right build maybe, the right height, but I couldn't be sure, and I didn't want to start a panic over someone who might just be a tired parent waiting for their own kid. I told Tomas we were going to head home a little early today, and his face went blank in this instant, practiced way that told me he'd already made his own assessment. He grabbed Adriana's hand without being asked, said they should bring the bucket of wood chips home, and started walking toward the gate. I gathered our stuff and followed, deliberately not looking at the woman on the bench. We walked home at a normal pace. I didn't run because I didn't want to scare Adriana and because I wasn't even sure anything was wrong. When we got inside, I locked the front door and checked the back door and all the windows on the first floor. Then I went to the kitchen and looked at Adriana's drawing on the fridge. Still right side up, still safe. I didn't tell Carlos about the woman that night. I talked myself out of it. She was probably nobody. A woman sitting on a bench at a park. That's not a crime. That's not even suspicious, really. Except Tomas had noticed her. And Tomas noticed everything, because Tomas had been trained by trauma to be a surveillance system in the body of a second grader. 2 days later, I found the first note. It was tucked under the front doormat, folded in half, handwritten on lined paper torn from a spiral notebook. The handwriting was small and cramped and perfectly legible. It said, I just want to see them. 5 minutes. I'm their mother. Please. No signature, no phone number, no name. But I knew who it was from. My hands shook as I read it again. Something about the please at the end made my throat tight. There was so much desperation in that word. So much compressed need. This wasn't the writing of someone who wanted to hurt her children. This was the writing of someone who missed them so badly she'd leave a note under a doormat because she had no other way to reach them. But I also remembered what Carlos had told me about the knife, about Miranda sitting on the kitchen floor at 11 at night with every door barricaded, holding a weapon, convinced she was the only thing standing between her children and some invisible threat. The problem with Miranda wasn't that she didn't love her kids. The problem was that her brain had broken the machinery that connected love to safe behavior. She loved them the way a drowning person loves air, desperately, dangerously, without any ability to hold on gently. I put the note in a plastic bag without touching it more than I already had. I called Carlos at work and told him. His end of the line was silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he said very quietly, "Don't let the kids see it. I'll be home in 2 hours. Call Detective Contreras. Tell her Miranda made contact." Detective Contreras answered on the 3rd ring. She was one of those people whose voice immediately makes you feel like an adult is in charge. Calm, direct, no wasted words. She asked me to describe the note, read it to her word for word, and tell her exactly where I found it and what time. She said they'd try to pull prints, but not to get my hopes up because paper was notoriously bad for that. She asked if I'd seen anyone near the house that morning. I told her about the woman at the park 2 days earlier. She paused, then said she'd send a patrol car to do regular drive-bys for the next few days. Carlos came home early that night and we sat at the kitchen table after the kids went to bed and he read the note through the plastic bag. I watched his face while he read it. He didn't look angry. He looked devastated. He put the bag down and pressed his palms against his eyes and said something in Spanish that I didn't catch, and when he dropped his hands, his eyes were wet. He told me that this was the part most people didn't understand. Miranda wasn't a bad person. She wasn't evil or malicious or cruel. She was sick. The woman who'd sat on the kitchen floor with a knife genuinely believed she was protecting her children. The terrifying thing about schizoaffective disorder wasn't that it turned you into a monster. It was that it turned your love into a weapon without you ever knowing the difference. He said the hardest thing he'd ever done was filing for full custody. Harder than the divorce. Harder than the knife night. Harder than explaining to Tomas why mommy couldn't live with them anymore. Because every time he saw Miranda, he saw the girl he'd fallen in love with at 17. He saw the woman who'd held Tomas for the first time and cried with joy. She was still in there somewhere, buried under the paranoia and the delusions, and some part of him felt like he'd abandoned her by keeping her away from the only people she loved. I didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. Some situations don't have a comforting response. They just have the silence of someone sitting next to you while you carry something heavy. The second note came 3 days later. Same lined paper, same handwriting, this time tucked into the gap between the screen door and the frame. This one was longer. It talked about Adriana's favorite color being yellow and Tomas's obsession with dinosaurs, and how Miranda used to read them a book about a bear who was afraid of the dark. She wrote that she knew Carlos was trying to protect them, but that the children needed their mother. She wrote that she was better now, that she was taking her medication, that the voices were quieter. She wrote that she'd been watching from a distance, and the children looked happy, but there was a sadness in Tomas's eyes that only a mother could see. That line about Tomas's eyes hit me like a punch to the sternum because it was true. There was a sadness in Tomas's eyes, a wariness, a constant low-grade alertness that no amount of normal life could fully smooth out. Miranda had seen it from whatever distance she'd been watching from, and she was right about what it was, even if she was wrong about the solution. I bagged the note and called Contreras. She said she'd escalate the patrol frequency and was working on tracking Miranda's location. The notes in the park sighting suggested Miranda was living somewhere nearby, possibly in her car or a shelter. Contreras asked if I felt safe, and I said yes, even though the honest answer was more complicated than yes or no. That weekend, Carlos installed 2 more cameras, one pointed at the front door and one covering the backyard. He showed me how to access the feeds on my phone. He bought a new deadbolt for the back door and window locks for every window on the first floor. The house was getting more fortified every week, and I could see what it was doing to the kids. Tomas pretended not to notice the cameras, but I caught him checking his bedroom window lock before bed. Adriana asked why there were so many locks, and Carlos told her it was because their house had the best toys, and he didn't want any toy robbers getting in. She accepted this with the easy trust of a 3-year-old, but the fact that she'd noticed it all told me something. Monday morning arrived, and everything felt different the moment I stepped through the front door. The air had that charged quality that precedes something breaking. Tomas was already dressed for school, but sitting on the couch instead of eating breakfast. When I said good morning, he looked at me with those old eyes of his and said he'd had a bad dream about his mom. He said she was outside the window in the dream, pressing her face against the glass and smiling, and her smile looked right, but her eyes looked empty. He said in the dream he wanted to open the window, but his body wouldn't move. I sat next to him and asked if he wanted to talk about it. He shook his head and then leaned against my side, just briefly, before straightening up and going to the kitchen for cereal. He acted like the moment hadn't happened, but I felt the weight of it for the rest of the morning. Adriana drew her picture. Same blue house, same yellow sun, same red door. She taped it to the fridge. The day marched forward. At noon, I was warming up mac and cheese for Adriana, while Tomas read a book about sharks at the kitchen table. The house was quiet. A car drove past outside and kept going. Another car, then nothing. Then my phone buzzed with a notification from the front door camera. I opened the app and saw a woman standing on the porch. She was wearing the same gray hoodie from the park. No sunglasses this time. Her face was fully visible and it matched the photo Carlos had given me. Thinner than the photo, cheekbones sharper, dark circles under her eyes. But it was Miranda. She was standing perfectly still, hands at her sides, looking directly at the camera with an expression that was somehow both pleading and resolute. She knew the camera was there. She wanted to be seen. For about 3 seconds, I couldn't move. My brain was running through the protocol Carlos had walked me through. Kids upstairs, bathroom, lock, call 911, Contreras, Carlos, in that order. But my body was frozen at the counter with a pot of mac and cheese in one hand and my phone in the other. Tomas broke the spell. He'd looked up from his book and was watching my face, and whatever he saw there made his expression go completely flat. He closed the book, stood up, walked to the fridge, reached up and flipped Adriana's drawing upside down. Then he picked up his sister. Adriana was mid-bite of a cracker and started to protest, but Tomas whispered something in her ear and her protest died instantly. She wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder. Tomas carried her toward the stairs and looked back at me with a face that said, "Now you do your part." I moved. I set down the pot and followed them upstairs. The bathroom was the interior one with no windows, the one Carlos had specifically pointed out during my first week. I got both kids inside, locked the door, and pulled out my phone. Then Miranda knocked. It wasn't an aggressive knock. 3 soft raps, the kind of knock you'd use on a friend's door when you weren't sure they were home. Then her voice, muffled through the walls and the distance between us but audible. She said, "Tomas, Adriana, it's Mama. I just want to talk, just for a minute." I brought Tomas a book about ocean animals and Adriana's favorite crackers, the ones shaped like fish. Adriana lifted her head from Tomas's shoulder. "The fish ones," she whispered, and the hope in her voice nearly broke me in half. Tomas tightened his grip on his sister and said nothing. I dialed 911, told the dispatcher there was a woman violating a custody order at the address and that I had 2 minor children with me inside the house. The dispatcher asked if the woman was threatening anyone. I said no, but there was a court order prohibiting unsupervised contact, and the woman had a history of psychiatric episodes involving the children. The dispatcher said officers were being sent. I texted Carlos. "Miranda is at the front door right now. Kids are in the upstairs bathroom with me." Called 911. He didn't respond for 4 minutes, and those 4 minutes were the longest of my life. Miranda knocked again, still soft. She said she could hear them up there and she just needed 5 minutes. She said the courts were wrong and the doctors were wrong and she was their mother and nobody had the right to keep her from her babies. Her voice cracked on the word babies, and I pressed my hand over my mouth because I was about to make a sound I didn't want the kids to hear. Then her tone shifted, not dramatically, not like a switch flipping, more like a river changing direction. She started talking faster, her sentences piling into each other. She said she knew about the cameras and she knew Carlos was tracking her, and she knew the babysitter was reporting everything back to the detective. She said she'd been watching for weeks, and she'd seen me take the kids to the park and to the grocery store, and she knew their entire schedule. She said she wasn't going to let them take her children away permanently. She said she'd cooperate with the courts if they'd just give her a real chance, not the fake supervised visits where some stranger sat in the corner taking notes about how she interacted with her own children like she was an animal in a cage. I could hear her pacing on the porch through the camera feed on my phone. Back and forth, her movements getting faster. She was escalating. I'd seen this pattern before with my sister. The lucid front dissolving as the underlying distortion pushed through like weeds cracking concrete. Miranda started talking about the people who were following her again. She said they'd gotten to Carlos and that's why he'd taken the children. She said the psychiatrist was part of it, and the judge was part of it, and now I was part of it too, because I was the one keeping her from her babies while they were all upstairs scared and alone, and she was the only one who could truly keep them safe. Tomas was sitting on the bathroom floor with Adriana in his lap. He had his hands over her ears. His face was white. He was looking at me and I could see in his eyes that he recognized this version of his mother. He'd heard this before. In the middle of the night, through a locked bathroom door, while his 6-year-old hands had tried to cover his 1-year-old sister's ears exactly like they were doing now, he mouthed 2 words at me. "She's sick." Not angry, not scared, just stating a fact with a resignation that no second grader should possess. Then we heard the back door. Not knocking, rattling. She was trying the handle. I looked at my phone. The front porch camera showed an empty porch. She'd moved to the back. The new deadbolt held. I could hear her pulling on the door, then stopping, then pulling again. Then her voice from the backyard, louder now, losing the careful, reasonable tone she'd started with. She was calling the kids' names over and over, and mixed in with their names were things about the bad people and the cameras and how she'd figured out the truth about everyone. The sound of glass breaking almost stopped my heart. One of the basement windows. Small, half-height windows that were old and single-paned because Carlos had replaced the main floor windows but hadn't gotten to the basement yet. I heard her struggling through the window, scraping sounds, a grunt. Then the thud of someone landing on concrete. She was inside the house. My entire body went cold. I checked the bathroom door lock. Flimsy interior lock. The kind you can pop with a credit card or a hard shove, not a deadbolt, not a real barrier. I looked around the bathroom for anything useful. Towel bar, plunger, ceramic soap dish, nothing that would stop a determined adult. I pushed the heavy wooden laundry hamper in front of the door and stood behind it. Adriana was crying now, soft hitching sobs that she was trying to muffle in her brother's shirt. Tomas was rocking her gently, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working. I could hear Miranda moving through the basement, then the stairs, then the main floor. She was calling their names in that sing-song voice. Tomas, Adriana, Mama's here, Mama found you, you don't have to hide anymore. Each step she took sounded deliberate, measured. She was checking rooms. I could hear doors opening. The living room, the kitchen, the hall closet, working her way through the ground floor, then the bottom of the staircase. She started climbing. I was holding my phone in one hand and the heavy ceramic toilet tank lid in the other. It was the only thing in the room with any weight to it. My arms were shaking. I texted Carlos again. She's inside. Broke a window. She's coming upstairs. Where are the police? He responded instantly this time. 2 minutes. Hold on, Jess. Please hold on. Miranda reached the top of the stairs. I heard her push push open Tomas's bedroom door. Pause. Close it. Then Adriana's room. Pause. Close it. Then she was standing outside the bathroom. She tried the handle. It turned, but the door only opened an inch before hitting the hamper. She pushed harder. The hamper slid on the tile. I threw my weight against it. Miranda's voice came through the gap, close enough that I could hear her breathing. She said she knew they were in there and she wasn't going to hurt anyone. She said she just needed to hold them. She said she hadn't held Adriana since she was 2, and did I know what it was like to not hold your own child for over a year? She said her arms ached. She said she dreamed about the weight of Adriana falling asleep on her chest and woke up reaching for her. Then she pushed the door again, hard, and the hamper scraped back another 3 inches. She was stronger than I expected or more desperate than I'd calculated for, which in some ways amounts to the same thing. Adriana screamed, just a short burst, but it went through Miranda like electricity. She stopped pushing. Her breathing changed, got faster. Then she said Adriana's name very softly, and her voice broke completely, and she started crying. Deep, wrecked sobs that shook the door in its frame. Through the gap in the door, I could see a sliver of her face. Tears running down sunken cheeks, eyes wild but not with anger, with grief, with the kind of raw, animal pain that comes from being separated from your children by a brain that won't let you love them safely. She pressed her forehead against the door and said, "Baby, please don't scream. Mama isn't going to hurt you. I'm not the bad people. I'm your mama. I braided your hair the day you turned 2. You wore the yellow dress with the sunflowers. Don't you remember me?" Adriana went still in Tomas's arms. Then, in a voice so small it barely qualified as sound, she said, "Mama?" Tomas's arms tightened around his sister. He shook his head. "No, I heard the sirens then. Still distant, but closing fast. Miranda heard them too. Her crying stopped abruptly, and the grief on her face was replaced by something worse. A cold, focused terror that I recognized from my sister's worst moments. The paranoia was seizing the controls again. Her eyes went hard, and she started pushing the door again, violent now, slamming her shoulder against it. She was saying they were coming for the children, and she had to get them out, and I was working with them, and the police were in on it, and she was the only one who could protect them. The door was moving. The hamper was sliding. I braced my back against the wall and pushed with my legs, but she was running on adrenaline and delusion, and I was losing ground. Tomas stood up. He put Adriana in the bathtub, told her to stay down, and then he walked over and stood next to me. Without a word, he put his small hands on the hamper and pushed with everything his 7-year-old body had. His mother was on the other side of the door. He was pushing against her. The sirens were right outside now. I heard car doors, voices, the front door being tested, then the back door, then someone calling out to announce they were police officers. Miranda heard them too, and she froze. For 1 second she stopped pushing and I could hear her breathing, ragged and fast. And then she said something that I will never forget as long as I live. She said, "Tomas, baby, please come with me. Please, I'll take you somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't find us." Tomas kept his hands on the hamper, kept his weight pressed forward, and in a voice that was steady and clear and utterly heartbreaking, he said, "Mama, I love you, but you're sick and you need to go with the police now." Miranda made a sound, not a word, something deeper than language, a sound from the bottom of her chest that carried everything she'd lost and everything she couldn't have and everything her broken brain had stolen from her. She released the door and stepped backward. I heard her walk down the stairs, slowly this time. No urgency. The fight had gone out of her. I heard the front door open and the police officers giving commands, and Miranda saying, in a voice drained of everything except exhaustion, that she just wanted to see her children. I stayed in the bathroom with the kids until Carlos arrived 12 minutes later. He took the stairs 3 at a time and burst through the bathroom door and dropped to his knees and pulled both children into his chest. Adriana was still crying. Tomas was not. He sat rigid in his father's arms with dry eyes and a clenched jaw and stared at the wall. Downstairs, the officers were talking to Miranda. I could hear one of them speaking gently, using her name, asking about medication. Detective Contreras arrived and I heard her voice joining the others, measured and professional. Through the bathroom window, I could see the flashing lights painting the neighboring houses red and blue. Carlos asked if the kids were hurt and I said no, nobody was hurt. He looked at me and something in his face shifted. Not just gratitude, recognition. The recognition that I had stood between his children and the person who loved them most in the world, and that it had cost me something I couldn't yet calculate. An ambulance came for Miranda. She was going to a psychiatric facility, not jail, because Contreras had worked with the responding officers to treat this as a mental health crisis rather than a criminal breach. The custody violation would be addressed separately, but the immediate priority was getting Miranda stabilized on medication in a supervised environment. Before they put her in the ambulance, Miranda asked to say goodbye to the children. Contreras looked at Carlos. Carlos looked at me. I looked at Tomas. Tomas looked at his sister. Adriana said from the bathtub where she was still sitting with her knees pulled up, "Can I give Mama a hug?" Carlos closed his eyes. The longest 3 seconds I've ever witnessed passed. Then he said yes, but only outside with the officers present. He carried both kids downstairs and out onto the front porch. Miranda was sitting on the edge of the ambulance, a blanket around her shoulders, 2 EMTs standing nearby. She looked small, deflated. Whatever energy had driven her through a basement window and up the stairs was gone, replaced by a person who looked like she hadn't eaten or slept properly in weeks. Adriana walked across the front yard in her socks. Carlos stayed on the porch with Tomas. Miranda opened her arms, and Adriana walked into them, and Miranda held her daughter and pressed her face into Adriana's hair, and I watched a mother break apart and put herself back together in the span of a single embrace. It lasted maybe 15 seconds. Then the EMT gently said it was time to go, and Miranda whispered something in Adriana's ear and let go. Adriana walked back to the porch. Miranda looked at Tomas and smiled, and he raised his hand. Not a wave, just a hand, held up for a moment, like a signal. Then Carlos took them both inside. I gave my statement to Contreras sitting on the front steps while the ambulance pulled away. I told her everything in the order it happened. She took notes and asked clarifying questions, and when I finished, she told me I'd handled it better than most adults would have. She said that in her experience, people who freeze in situations like this aren't cowards. They just haven't been trained by previous experience to act. And people who act aren't braver. They've just had enough bad things happen to them that their body knows what to do before their brain catches up. She was right. Everything I'd done in that bathroom, I'd done on muscle memory built during my sister's episodes. The locked door, the barricade, the heavy object in my hand, the calm voice masking a screaming heart. I'd rehearsed this before in a different house with a different person and different stakes, and my body remembered even when my conscious mind was dissolving. That night, I went home and sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment complex for 45 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I called my sister. She answered on the second ring, her voice clear and alert, and I told her what had happened, and she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "That woman isn't a villain." "I know," I said. And then she said something that I've thought about every day since. She said, "The cruelest thing about this kind of illness is that it turns your love into the thing that hurts the people you love. You're not choosing to be dangerous. You're dangerous because you care so much, and your brain can't do anything with that caring except twist it into fear." I went back to work the next morning. Adriana had drawn a new picture. Same blue house, same yellow sun, same red door. But this time, there were 4 stick figures instead of 3. She pointed at the 4th one and said that was me. I taped it to the fridge right side up. Over the next few months, Miranda was stabilized at the psychiatric facility. She was put on a new medication regimen that her doctors said was more effective than her previous one. She voluntarily agreed to remain in treatment and began supervised visits again, this time at the facility with her psychiatrist present. Contreras told me the custody arrangement was being reviewed, but that the priority was getting Miranda consistently medicated and evaluated before any changes were considered. Tomas started seeing a new therapist who specialized in kids dealing with parental mental illness. The therapist told Carlos that Tomas had been functioning as a parentified child, taking on emotional responsibilities that should have belonged to the adults around him. The work would be slow, she said. You don't undo that kind of adaptation quickly. It becomes wired into who they are. I noticed the changes in small ways. Tomas started leaving his bedroom door open at night, something he'd never done before. He stopped checking the window locks before bed. He laughed louder and more easily. He still stood in doorways and listened before entering rooms, but now sometimes he'd burst in without pausing, like a normal kid, and every time he did, it felt like a tiny victory. Adriana stopped drawing the same picture every day. Her drawings became more varied. Houses with green doors and purple doors, and once, memorably, a house with no door at all because she said the people who lived there could fly in through the windows. She still mentioned her mama sometimes, casually, without the loaded silence that used to follow. She'd say Mama likes this song, or Mama has a bird on her arm, and then move on. Like Miranda was a normal part of her life, rather than an absence shaped like a person. I stayed with the Reyes family through the end of my teaching degree, and then 6 months beyond that while I student taught at a school nearby. Carlos never asked me to stay past my original commitment, but he also never stopped offering me reasons to. A raise, a more flexible schedule, the back bedroom if I ever needed a place to crash. I think he knew that what held me there wasn't the money or the logistics. It was the kids. It was always the kids. When I finally did leave, it was for a teaching position 2 states away. The kind of opportunity you don't turn down when you're 24 and building a career. I told the kids on a Sunday afternoon, sitting on the living room floor with Adriana in my lap and Tomas leaning against my side. Adriana cried and asked if I was leaving because of the bad day. I said no. I said I was leaving because I'd finished school and needed to go be a teacher somewhere, and it had nothing to do with the bad day or with them. I told her I loved her and that wasn't going to change because I moved. Tomas didn't cry. He sat very still, and then he stood up and walked to the fridge and pulled down the drawing with 4 stick figures. He brought it back to me and said I should take it so I wouldn't forget what our house looked like. I have that drawing in a frame on my dresser. It's been 3 years and the crayon is fading, but I can still see every detail. The blue house, the yellow sun, the red door, the 4 figures holding hands in a row, and if you look closely at the tallest figure, the one Adriana said was me, you can see she drew something in its hand. A tiny rectangle that might be a phone or might be a book or might be nothing at all, but I think it's a drawing of a drawing. I think she drew me holding their picture, the one that meant safe. I check in with Carlos every few weeks. Miranda had a setback last spring, went off her medication for a period, but was re-hospitalized before she decompensated fully. She's back in supervised visits now. Carlos says Tomas asked to write his mom a letter last month, the first time he'd initiated contact with her. He wrote it himself, without asking for help, and sealed it in an envelope before Carlos could see what it said. I don't know what was in that letter. I don't need to. Whatever Tomas wrote to his mother was between them, and the fact that he wrote it at all means something is healing in a place I can't see, but spent 2 years trying to protect. Some nights I still dream about the sound of the bathroom door shaking in its frame, about Miranda's voice saying, "Don't you remember me?" About the weight of a ceramic lid in my trembling hands, about a 7-year-old boy telling his mother he loved her and asking her to go with the police in the same breath. Those dreams aren't nightmares exactly. They're more like the echo of something that changed the shape of me permanently. I went into that house as a 22-year-old who needed a job and came out as a person who understood that some of the most dangerous situations you'll ever face don't involve anyone who wants to do you harm. Sometimes the threat is love that's been broken by illness, bent into something sharp without anyone choosing to sharpen it. And the bravest thing you can do isn't fight. It's hold still. It's stand between the door and the children. It's stay even when every rational part of you says to leave. And it's know that the person on the other side of that door is suffering too. And that doesn't make them safe, but it does make them human.